Somewhere in the Western Pacific, the ocean is no longer quiet. 3 of the most powerful warships ever built are cutting through open water at full speed, their flight decks alive with the smell of jet fuel and the organized chaos of military operations at peak readiness. FA-18 Super Hornets are being armed and cycled in continuous rotations. Destroyers form a protective ring around each carrier. Submarines slip silently beneath the surface. Invisible, lethal, waiting. This is not a training exercise. This is a signal, and the entire world is reading it. The United States Navy has not deployed 3 carrier strike groups simultaneously in years. When it happens, it does not happen by accident. Every admiral, every intelligence analyst, every defense minister, from Beijing to Moscow, from Tehran to Pyongyang, understands what 3 carriers in the same theater of operations means. It means Washington has made a decision. It means the calculus of deterrence has shifted. It means the United States is communicating in the clearest language that exists in the game of military powers that it is prepared to act. To understand why, you have to go back further than this week. You have to understand the architecture of tension that has been quietly assembling itself for years, brick by brick, naval base by naval base, missile by missile. The Indo-Pacific has become the most strategically contested body of water on the planet. China's military expansion has not been slow or subtle. It has been deliberate, methodical, and funded at a scale that few in the West followed with the seriousness it deserved. Artificial islands in the South China Sea, now fortified with radar systems, missile batteries, and airstrips capable of operating next-generation military aircraft. Naval modernization programs that have produced the largest fleet in the world by hull count. And a consistent pattern of asserting territorial claims over waters that smaller nations have depended on for generations, for fishing, for trade, for survival. Taiwan sits at the center of all of it. A democratic island of 23 million people that Beijing has never stopped calling a breakaway province, and that the United States has never stopped arming and, in a manner unspoken but widely understood, guaranteeing. Every year that passes without a resolution to this tension is a year in which the next crisis becomes more likely and more dangerous. But this deployment is not just about Taiwan. The situation in the Middle East has once again ignited. Shipping lanes through the Red Sea and the Persian Gulf, corridors through which a significant portion of the world's energy supply flows daily, are under renewed and growing pressure. Iranian-backed forces have demonstrated both the willingness and the operational capability to threaten commercial and military vessels. Tankers carrying the fuel that powers the economies of Europe and Asia have been targeted. Freedom of navigation, which the developed world took for granted for decades, is being actively contested. And on the Korean Peninsula, Pyongyang has continued its weapons testing, choosing its moments with calculated precision, watching the global landscape and measuring its own opportunities. A regime that has learned, over decades, that strategic provocations carry bargaining value, especially when the great powers are distracted in other theaters. 3 theaters, 3 pressure points, and Washington chose to answer all of them at once. The deployment of a carrier strike group is not simply the deployment of a ship. Each carrier is the centerpiece of a mobile task force that includes guided missile cruisers, destroyers equipped with the Aegis combat system, attack submarines, supply vessels, and between 70 and 90 aircraft of varying capabilities. The strike range of a single carrier air wing extends hundreds of miles in every direction. The combined reach of 3 carrier strike groups operating in coordinated fashion creates an envelope of air and sea power that no adversary in the world can easily ignore or easily overcome. Military analysts watching satellite imagery, tracking transponder signals, and reading the movements of these battle groups are drawing serious conclusions. This is not routine presence. The positioning is deliberate. Each strike group placed at a calculated distance from a specific flashpoint, close enough to project power rapidly, far enough to avoid accidental provocation. It is the language of coercive diplomacy, written in steel, jet fuel, and nuclear warheads at readiness. Former senior Pentagon officials point out that simultaneous 3 carrier deployments are reserved for moments when the administration needs to communicate resolve at a level that cannot be misread. Diplomatic cables and phone calls can be ignored or reinterpreted. A public statement can be dismissed as political rhetoric. 3 nuclear-powered aircraft carriers in motion, each carrying more firepower than most countries possess in their entire armed forces, cannot be ignored. But this is where the situation becomes genuinely precarious, because there is a fundamental difference between the intent of a message and its reception. Deterrence only functions when both sides share the same understanding of the signals being sent. History is full of moments when one nation believed it was communicating caution and restraint, while the other received the message as provocation and encirclement. The deployment of American military power on this scale does not exist in a vacuum. China is watching and calculating. Russia is watching and calculating. Iran is watching and calculating. And each of them is conducting its own internal assessment of what this moment demands, of their armed forces, of their foreign policy, of their allies. If pressure in the Taiwan Strait intensifies, the margin for miscalculation narrows dangerously. A Chinese naval vessel and an American destroyer operating in close proximity in the same water corridor, both with orders to hold their position, both with commanders who believe they are acting defensively. That is how incidents begin. Not with grand decisions made in capital cities, but with a moment of confusion in contested waters that escalates faster than any government can manage. In the Middle East, a strike on an American vessel, even one carried out by a proxy force, even one that its state sponsors claim they did not authorize, could trigger a response that pulls the entire region into open conflict. The carriers provide options. Options by their nature create pressure to be used, and once military logic begins to move, it is extraordinarily difficult to stop. In Korea, the presence of overwhelming American naval power near the peninsula is simultaneously a reassurance to Seoul and an irritant to Pyongyang, a regime that has always responded to perceived threats with escalation of its own. A regime that is watching, assessing, and deciding whether this moment represents an opportunity or a danger. What happens next depends on decisions being made right now, in rooms the public will never see, by people whose names most of the world will never know. It depends on whether red lines are being clearly communicated and clearly understood by all parties. It depends on whether the mechanisms of crisis communication, the hotlines, the back channels, the diplomatic relationships that exist precisely for moments like this still function under real pressure, when the stakes become concrete and the consequences cease to be hypothetical. It depends, in the end, on something no strategic analysis can guarantee: human judgment under conditions of maximum uncertainty. 3 aircraft carriers are in position. The message has been sent. The question that history will answer is whether anyone on the other side chose to listen, and whether the silence that follows will be the silence of peace, or the silence that comes before the storm.